he's one up there who's tied, obviously, getting close to the Golden Boot. I'm really impressed with him. I'm disappointed with his performance in the final, though.
Yeah.
I just think he didn't turn up in the final.
We had an incredible Cinderella in Bodø Glimt to claim some real scouts, particularly at home. This is a side north of the Arctic Circle. You go to the Arctic Circle, and then you go north. Bodø Glimt, absolutely brilliant. The first ever Norwegian club to make a European semifinal. And then, of course, that insane quarterfinal between Man United, who, of course, lose the final, to Tottenham against Lyon, then went on to be Athletic Club. But that was madness in Manchester. It was 6-4 at one point, United going on to win it in extra time. Lazio were perhaps the surprise of the league phase, topping the table with 6 wins from 8 games, 19 points as well. And Lazio, unfortunately, could not get it done in the knockout round, eventually losing to Bodø Glimt on penalties. And there were some of the big stories, along with Tottenham, for the first time in a long time, going on and winning the Europa League, their first major trophy since 2008, and of course the first major European trophy since 1984. But Ian, we wanted to talk about first of all, in terms of the big stories, what Bodø Glimt did over the course of this Europa League. We'll probably remember what they did because we all kind of learned where Bodø was. We learned what Bodø Glimt was about as a club, and in some ways this was the first projection of themselves onto the major European stage, and what a projection it was. This was a side that really took a lot of the headlines.
Yeah, I actually knew where Bodø Glimt was personally because it's a stone throw away from where I actually grew up, in case you couldn't tell by the accent. It's not too far away from the Arctic Circle. Certainly Scotland felt like the Arctic Circle when I was growing up. But how can you not love the fairy tale story that was Bodø Glimt for what they did do? Obviously the goal scoring that they did do, especially at home, they were a force to be reckoned with. I think they used the weather to their advantage, the unusual surface that they had at home as well. Scored 9 goals, conceded 6 in the group stage. They obviously were a team, and we enjoyed watching their style of football. But I think there's been a couple of players who really stood out to me. Kasper Vartz with 7 goals. If I'm not mistaken, Witty, 7 goals, isn't that like up there with Golden Boot, or at least joint Golden Boot
right
for the competition?
Right up there.
So at least he'll have an opportunity to celebrate. They've been 2 or 3 really good performers, and I want to just take my hat off to this competition in particular, because it creates Cinderella stories like what Bodø Glimt just gave us. Fabulous to watch. And I will find it hard to find a fan out there who will disagree with me that having Bodø Glimt in that final would have been more entertaining than the final we just watched.
An Athletic Club as well, which is one of the big disappointments. They were obviously having the Europa League final in their home stadium, but couldn't get there, losing to Man United in the semifinal. Let's talk a bit about Lazio and what they did over the course of this Europa League by winning the league phase. This is a club that maybe left a little something on the table by not going further.
I mean, you must have been impressed with what they did do. They could have gone further. And if you look at what they did do in the group stage, I mean, they were my favourites, Woody.
Yeah, and when you looked at them at the start of the season, I don't think anyone would have had them as even a top contender in the Europa League. Never mind in Serie, where they're competing all the way to the final day for a Champions League spot for all the changes that they made in the summer.
Yeah, I mean, also some outstanding performances from them individually. I think Pedro really stood out in this competition. He's also done so in Serie A. I think it's double figures now, goals, if I'm not mistaken, across all competitions for him. Loves a penalty kick, by the way. I'm just going to throw that out there. But they've been dangerous. Guendouzi really stood out in this competition. He always has a tendency to step up in European football. My personal opinion, when I watch him in European football, he seems to raise his game to the next level. I'm actually disappointed with him, though. I felt like there was more left in the tank, not only domestically, where I felt like maybe just putting himself further up the table. I think in European competition, if you look at the quality of play, especially that final, Lazio were probably up there with the most entertaining team in the competition. Certainly played the most pleasing on the eye style of football for me.
Yeah, and I think they lost key players at key times from an injury point of view, namely Tati Castellanos, and as well Nuno Tavares, who was very good getting down that left side. He's dealt with a number of injuries this season as well. Now, we want to talk about one of the sides from Scotland, your homeland, that was terrific. Rangers were a real testament to maybe good in Europe, but not so good in the league. But this was no doubt the salvaging point of their season, knocking out Jose Mourinho's Fenerbahce and making a real fist of it in this competition, Rangers.
Listen, Rangers, Glasgow Rangers, shocking domestically. Just nowhere near good enough. They were miles away from it. They had a couple of coaches, obviously, throughout the course of the season, and Philippe Clement, who just didn't work out for them. And then they appointed Barry Ferguson, who did a good job, obviously, trying to make them a bit more competitive in the second part of that Europa League campaign. Listen, Rangers did very well to finish in the top 8 in the group stage. I give them a ton of credit for doing so. They weren't necessarily the best defensively, but they still scored 16 goals in the 8 games that they had. And listen to this one. I went to dig into the stats because normally Rangers I associate, especially when you've got James Tavernier, set plays, penalty kicks, that's where the goals are essentially coming from, especially in European competition when the quality is just sometimes a bit jump high. For the Scottish Prem sides, they scored 18 of their 19 goals from open play in the competition, which caught me a little bit by surprise. Very impressive performances. Tavernier was outstanding. Czerny was one who really stood out. The goals he scored, 6 goals, of course, for them. And I always love watching Scottish teams perform in European competition, especially at home. Great camera action at Ibrox. They've got that drone that flies through. It's special for Scottish football to see Rangers and Celtic doing better this year in European competition. I will see where they go next season. Some suggestion that maybe Steven Gerrard can return as manager for next season. Now, let's get on to one of the top players of the competition, but didn't really deliver in this final. Bruno Fernandes did have 7 goals and 5 assists throughout the Europa League, was their main man on some of the biggest nights, but couldn't deliver in the final. What did you make of his tournament? I thought he had a great tournament, and I think in large part he's probably the reason why United made it all the way to the final. He was outstanding. He's the one that pushes this team forward. Obviously, Manchester United have been so desperately poor, especially with the goals that they've scored. 42 goals in 37 games in the Premier League. They've been awful, and he's been probably the one player who stood out with his 8 goals and 9 assists in the Premier League. But in this competition in particular, again, I go back to it. He recognised very early that domestically it was going to be a problem for Manchester United. He just didn't have the players around him to be, supportive of what his quality was and his talent was. He recognised that in this competition, in the Europa League, United were actually one of the better teams and they had a real chance. Comebacks in games, you kind of relied heavily on his performances, dead ball situations, obviously his willing ability to be able to see a pass that so few players simply can't see. You read the stats out already. He's one up there who's tied, obviously, getting close to the Golden Boot. I'm really impressed with him. I'm disappointed with his performance in the final, though. I just think he didn't turn up in the final. Yeah, there weren't very many Manchester United players that really delivered much in this final. Now, Ian, we said before the show that I would pick a best 11 from the Europa League, and you would get on here and hammer me for it. So let's show you our best 11 of the Europa League here on Scoreline. Here's what I've gone for. Christos Mandas in goal from Lazio really earned a place in the regular starting 11 through his performances in the Europa League. And then Angelino Romagnoli, Vivian of Athletic Club, who is fantastic both domestically and in Europe, is that center of defense. Pedro Porro on the right side. Berg in that midfield. Patrick Berg, who was terrific for Bodø Glimt throughout the campaign, with Bruno Fernandes and Ryan Cherki in the middle. And then Václav Černý, you mentioned his performances. Love what he did for Rangers in that forward line with Solanke and Nico Williams. Ian Joy, your thoughts? Yeah, I mean, there's only one player probably we would add in there, and of course that would be Kasper Varksho. I think from Bodø Glimt, he deserved a bit of a shout for the goals that he did score. Obviously, he's going to take a share of the Golden Boot. I love the Cherki shout. He leads the way for goals and assists, so goal contributions. He was outstanding. Dom Solanke is an interesting choice up top there. Obviously, he was also involved in goals and contributions and assists. He was very good. Nico Williams, listen, for me, Williams was an average season from him. And even in European competition, okay, he was good, but he wasn't great. He wasn't the version we got from Williams last season, especially leading up to the Euros. He looked a little bit burnt out to me. Czerny shout, I love, because he was probably the key factor for Glasgow Rangers even get anywhere near those knockout stages. He was excellent. But yeah, very good, Witty. I thought I was going to be able to argue with a little bit more, but because we just debated a moment ago, I'll give you a break. Well, fair enough.